2,500 years ago, back in Greece, a great philosopher named Aristotle classified living organisms based on whether, they were capable of moving or not, which then at that point, logically and obviously, included only two groups, plants and animals. He further placed animals into three groups, those that fly, those that walk, and those that swim. And talking about classification, you just cannot ignore the contributions of Carolus Linnaeus, a Swedish botanist who dedicated almost his entire life in identifying and classifying newer organisms, which is why he's rightly called the father of classification. So for terms like order, species, family, and so on, you need to thank Linnaeus. If you look back at what happened in 1735, Linnaeus furthered Aristotle's thoughts and classified organisms into two kingdoms, Vegetabilia, which I'm sure you guessed are the vegetables, and Animalia, animals of course, the two kingdom classification. But this classification wasn't universally accepted because of some obvious reasons, which you're going to understand now. 1. What do you do with a protozoan like Euglena that possesses characteristics of both plants and animals? That is, it has chlorophyll like plants and it can move like an animal because of its flagellum. Then, there is no proper distinction between prokaryotes and eukaryotes, like in the case of bacteria. It doesn't have a nuclear envelope. It doesn't have membrane-bound cellular organelles. But they were placed in the plant group at that point. Both photosynthetic and non-photosynthetic organisms were placed together in kingdom Plantae. For example, the fungi that lack chlorophyll and are saprophytic in nature, they were also put into the plant kingdom. Next, organisms like lichens do not fall either in the animal or the plant kingdom. They're just too primitive, right, to be in either of them. And then you have organisms like diatoms placed under the plant kingdom and protozoans placed under the animal kingdom. These organisms are of the same level of organization and they both reproduce by fission. Yet, they were placed in different kingdoms. So many question marks and so many problems in this kind of classification. Because of that, we actually had to move ahead. And so, the two-kingdom classification was just not suitable because of the large diversity in the number of organisms. As years passed by, several biologists improvised on Linnaeus' system of classification. And almost a century later, after his work, Ernst Haeckel, a German investigator, in 1866 precisely, modified Linnaeus' system of classification by adding another kingdom called Protista, which led to a three-kingdom classification. What he did was that he placed all unicellular organisms under Protista, irrespective of whether they were plants or animals. So, what would this include? Protozoans, fungi, bacteria, algae, and various other microorganisms. However, Haeckel's system was still not widely accepted, and microorganisms continued to be classified as plants, like bacteria and fungi, like I spoke about earlier, or animals, for example, protozoa. So the classification system that we use today, and that we are going to discuss in complete detail, was devised by Robert Whittaker in 1968. And it places every living thing into groups based on their similarities in anatomy, morphology, and so on. So Whittaker's classification scheme recognizes, this is very important, 5 kingdoms. What are those? Monera, Protista, fungi, Plantae, and Animalia. Whittaker's 5-kingdom classification is based on 4 important factors. Number 1, how complex the cell structure is. So, you have a simple primitive cell called a prokaryotic cell, as in the case of a bacteria and algae, and the second type of a cell called a eukaryotic cell, which has a complex structure, like in a fungus, a plant, or an animal. The second important basis or criteria is how complex the organism's body is. From unicellular to multicellular, no tissues to fully fledged tissues, organs and organ systems, from no complexity to a beautiful complexity. The next important factor is the food they eat. Whether they make food on their own, that's called autotrophic nutrition, or whether they eat food made by others, that's called heterotrophic nutrition. You know this. And the last point is an important and an interesting point to actually understand. It's called phylogenetic relationship. What is that? Phylogeny is the evolutionary history of organisms, an index of true relationship among organisms. That is how far we all are related. So phylogeny, for example, helps you answer interesting questions like, are bats and birds related? Think about it. Are they related? Both of them fly, yes. But do they share a common evolutionary history? That is, do they have a common ancestor? The answer to your surprise is no. They are not related. Yes, they both use their wings to fly, but bats are mammals that are born alive from their mothers. And birds, well, you know this, they lay eggs and they belong to the class Aves. So all kingdoms are arranged to show the probable phylogenetic relationships based on, fossils and maybe other evidences. And now what we're going to do is visit these kingdoms one by one. Understand what made them come together under the banner of a single kingdom.